The rain hammered against the church windows as Father Gabriel wiped the sweat from his brow. Another long day, another night of prayer in the quiet church. But tonight, something felt different. Suddenly, the church doors slammed open with a bang. Gabriel turned in shock. A woman, soaked through and trembling, burst inside. She was holding a small child, barely conscious. "Help me, Father," the woman cried. "Please, she's sick and I don't know what to do." "Hi there. I'm Goldie, and welcome to Goldie's Love Stories." Gabriel rushed toward them. The child, a girl no older than 7, lay limp in her arms. Sweat covered her face, and her chest barely rose with each shallow breath. "Why haven't you gone to a hospital?" Gabriel asked urgently. The woman, gasping for air, struggled to speak. I can't afford the medicine. I can't. I don't have enough money." Her voice cracked, her face full of panic. Gabriel's stomach twisted. This wasn't the first time he'd seen this kind of fear, this kind of hopelessness. He remembered Josh. Josh had been a young man, full of potential but lost to addiction. Gabriel had tried to help him, even taken him to the hospital once when he was struggling with withdrawal. But Josh didn't have the resources, no insurance, no support. He couldn't get the treatment he needed. And just like that, Josh had slipped away, disappearing from the community one day, his life cut short. The town said it was his own fault, but Gabriel always felt responsible. He should have done more. "Father, please." Jennifer's voice broke through his thoughts. He looked at the desperate mother again. Her eyes were wide with fear, and the little girl, Flora, was barely hanging on. Gabriel shook his head, pushing the memory of Josh aside. "We're not waiting. I'm taking you to the hospital." Jennifer shook her head, her hands clutching Flora tighter. "No, Father, they'll just send me away. I can't pay for the medicine. They'll tell me to leave with nothing." "Stay here," Gabriel said quickly. He ran out the door, not waiting for her response. He had a plan. In moments, he returned, his car's headlights cutting through the storm. He threw open the door, grabbing Jennifer's arm. "We're going now. She needs help." Jennifer hesitated, looking down at her daughter.
"But—"
"No buts," Gabriel interrupted. "I'm not letting her die like this. Let's go." Gabriel helped them into the car, the storm making the drive treacherous. Jennifer didn't say much, but her eyes were full of gratitude and fear. As they approached the hospital, Gabriel's mind raced. He knew the doctors wouldn't turn them away, but without money for the medications, there was no guarantee Flora would get what she needed. His heart beat faster as they neared the emergency room doors. "I won't let her suffer," Gabriel whispered to himself. As they approached the entrance, Gabriel pulled up to the emergency room doors. He barely had time to stop the car before he was out and rushing to the passenger side. "Jennifer, stay with her," Gabriel shouted as he opened the door, lifting Flora into his arms. Jennifer jumped out and followed closely behind him as they rushed into the hospital. The cold air hit them as the sliding glass doors opened, and they were immediately greeted by the sterile, fluorescent lights of the ER. Nurses and doctors were rushing around, and Gabriel could feel his heart pounding in his chest. A nurse at the front desk looked up, her face going pale when she saw Flora. "She needs help immediately," Gabriel said, barely able to keep his voice steady. "Please, she's dying." The nurse didn't hesitate. "Bring her in," she ordered, moving quickly toward an empty examination room. Gabriel followed, Jennifer close behind. Flora was placed on a hospital bed, and doctors and nurses began working immediately, hooking her up to IVs, checking her vital signs, and administering medicine. Jennifer stood helplessly in the corner, watching as the team worked quickly to stabilize her daughter. Gabriel stood beside her, watching with bated breath. It didn't take long before the head doctor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, turned to them. "She's critical," the doctor said. "Her fever is dangerously high. We're going to do everything we can, but the next 24 hours will be crucial." Jennifer's face crumpled in fear. Will she make it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The doctor hesitated for a moment. "We'll do our best." Gabriel stood silent, his mind racing. He couldn't help but think back to Josh. He remembered how the doctors had been quick to act when Josh came in, but after they stabilized him, they had told him to follow up with more treatment. But Josh never did. He slipped through the cracks, just like so many others who couldn't afford to stay in the system. But this time was different. Gabriel wasn't going to let that happen again. He pulled Jennifer aside as they stood in the waiting room. "We'll make sure she gets the treatment she needs after she gets out of here," Gabriel said, his voice low but determined. "I won't let her fall through the cracks." Jennifer looked at him, her eyes wide with gratitude. "But I don't have the money, Father." "How? How can I pay for that?" Gabriel's throat tightened. He knew the answer, but it was a decision he never imagined he would have to make. The church had an emergency fund, money set aside to help those in need, but it wasn't meant for this. It wasn't meant for high-cost medical bills. It was meant to pay for food, shelter, and basic necessities, not for life-saving treatments. But as Gabriel looked at Jennifer, standing there with fear in her eyes, the decision seemed simple. His heart sank into his stomach. What was his job if not to protect the ones who needed help the most? Without a word, Gabriel walked toward the nurse's station, his footsteps heavy. The storm outside had nothing on the storm brewing inside his mind. He reached the desk, where a nurse was busy filling out paperwork and paid in advance the treatment for Flora. The money came from the church's emergency funds, a sum that he knew would put him at risk of losing his position. But it didn't matter now. He couldn't let Flora die. Gabriel turned and walked back to Jennifer, who was sitting anxiously by Flora's side, holding her hand. The sight of the little girl's pale face, flushed with fever, made his heart tighten. He couldn't imagine the agony of watching a child suffer, especially when there was nothing you could do to stop it. "It's done," Gabriel said, trying to sound reassuring, though his voice was tight with emotion. "Flora will get the treatment she needs." Jennifer's face was a mask of exhaustion and relief. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also something else, something Gabriel couldn't quite place. "Thank you, Father Gabriel," Jennifer whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to say." Gabriel sat down beside her, his hands folded in his lap, trying to find the right words. But before he could speak, Jennifer let out a deep sigh and began to speak again, this time, not just to thank him, but to open up as though the floodgates had been unlocked. "You know, Father," Jennifer said, her voice soft but strained, "I've spent most of my life just trying to survive. I never had a chance to stop and think about what I was doing. It was always just one day after the next, doing whatever I could to keep going." Gabriel stayed silent, his gaze steady, encouraging her to continue. Jennifer wiped a tear from her cheek, and Gabriel noticed the weariness in her eyes, the lines of hardship etched deeply into her face. "I wasn't always alone. There was someone once. His name was Josh." She paused, her voice catching. "He was a good man, you know? But he had his demons. We all do. And I loved him. But I couldn't save him. And now look at where we are." Gabriel's heart skipped a beat. The name Josh hit him like a punch to the gut. The ghost of the young man he had failed to save came rushing back, his face, his addiction, the feeling of helplessness that had haunted Gabriel for years. It was all coming together in a painful blur. "Josh," Gabriel whispered. "He was your partner?" Jennifer nodded, her eyes clouded with pain. "I thought I could fix him. We were so young and we had Flora and I thought we could make it. But Josh, he had his struggles. He couldn't stay away from his addiction. And when I finally left him, I thought I could give Flora a better life. But I couldn't escape the past. It followed me. And now I'm here, praying that I can do more for her than I ever did for him." Gabriel's mind swirled. He could hear the echo of Josh's troubled past in Jennifer's words, the same guilt, the same hopelessness. A sense of abandonment clung to her like a shadow. She hadn't been able to save Josh, and now she was trying to save Flora. But at what cost? I couldn't get her the help she needed, Jennifer continued, voice barely a whisper. I didn't have enough money for the doctor. I couldn't even get her medicine. I just kept thinking, if I could have gotten the help sooner, if I hadn't stayed in that relationship, if I'd been stronger, maybe things would be different. Gabriel felt a knot tighten in his chest as Jennifer's words sank in. The parallels between her story and Josh's were impossible to ignore. The self-blame, the sacrifice, the feeling of never being enough. It was all there. Josh had never been able to shake off the past either, and now here was Jennifer, struggling with the same weight. Jennifer, Gabriel began, but his voice faltered. He didn't know how to comfort her without acknowledging the painful truth that lay beneath her words. She wasn't just struggling with Flora's illness. She was still grieving Josh's death, even though she hadn't said it out loud. You're doing everything you can, Gabriel finally said, his voice firm. What matters now is Flora. You can't change what's happened, but you can be there for her. That's all you can do. That's all anyone can do. Jennifer nodded slowly, but Gabriel could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. He didn't know how to erase that doubt, how to ease her guilt. But he understood it all too well. It was a burden he had carried for years, the feeling of failure, the questions that never went away. The second day brought with it a storm of a different kind. Word had spread quickly through the small town. Nurses, gossiping as they often did in the halls of the hospital, had shared the story of Father Gabriel's decision. The priest had used the church's emergency funds to pay for a sick child's treatment, a child who wasn't even part of the church. And now, the town was buzzing with mixed reactions. Some parishioners were livid. In the small community where people rarely had much, they were quick to see the act as an overstep. A group of regulars gathered at the local cafe, their voices rising with indignation. Father Gabriel's gone too far this time. That money was meant for the church, not for some random girl, one man grumbled, slamming his coffee cup onto the table. Theft, pure and simple. Another parishioner, an elderly woman with a sharp gaze, shook her head. He's supposed to be our shepherd, not a charity worker. He's risking the church's reputation. What's next? Giving away the church's furniture? Others, however, rallied in Gabriel's defense. At the town market, people spoke in hushed tones, exchanging glances as they made their opinions known. I heard about what he did. Paying for that child's treatment. That was the right thing to do, an older woman said, shaking her head with admiration. A priest who truly cares for his flock. That's what we need. A middle-aged man nodded. People forget that the church was built on the principle of helping others. I'd rather my tithe be used like this than be spent on nonsense. He did what Jesus would have done. Still, Gabriel could feel the weight of the controversy pressing down on him. He sat at his desk, staring at the stack of paperwork, but his mind was elsewhere. Back at the church, the town, the people who were either condemning or praising his actions. It wasn't the first time Gabriel had been at the center of controversy, but this felt different. The act of helping one child, one mother, had sparked a deeper discussion on faith, duty, and what it meant to be truly compassionate. Would this decision cost him everything he'd worked for? Meanwhile, inside the small hospital room, there was light. The storm inside Gabriel's mind didn't touch the bright, fragile world of Jennifer and Flora. Flora had started to show signs of recovery, and with each passing hour, her color returned, her fever slowly subsiding. Jennifer, who had been a shadow of herself, her spirit broken from years of loneliness and struggle, began to find pieces of herself again in the innocent smile of her daughter. Flora's laughter, though faint, was a balm to Jennifer's soul. As the little girl's health improved, so did the hope in Jennifer's heart, piece by fragile piece. She began talking more, telling Gabriel stories about how she and Flora used to play in the park, how she used to dream of a better life for them both, before everything had fallen apart. And through those stories, Gabriel saw the power of small acts of kindness, how it could change everything, even in the darkest of times. Gabriel sat with Jennifer one evening as the sun set, casting a warm golden glow into the room. They watched Flora, who had drifted into peaceful sleep, her breathing steady. "She's going to be okay, isn't she, Father?" Jennifer asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Gabriel nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him that had been missing for so long. "She's strong. And you've done everything right." Jennifer smiled weakly, the weight of her guilt still pressing down on her, but lighter now. "I never thought I'd see the day. I've been running from everything, my mistakes, the choices I made. But you gave us a chance." Gabriel couldn't find the words to explain what he felt. But deep down, he knew that saving Flora had done more than just help a child. It had helped the mother, too. It had given her the strength to believe in something again. A few days later, Gabriel made his decision. He couldn't just sit back and let this be a singular moment of charity. If this town truly needed healing, if the people needed to be reminded of the real purpose of faith, then it had to start somewhere. And so, Gabriel stood before the congregation one Sunday, his voice calm but firm. "I've heard your concerns," he began, looking out at the sea of faces. "Some were wary, some were hopeful, and I understand your doubts. But I will not apologize for what I did. I used the church's emergency funds to help a child in need, and I would do it again. Because our duty is not to be wealthy or to safeguard resources. It is to be there for those who need us." There was a long silence. Gabriel held his breath, waiting for the backlash. But instead, a few parishioners stood, their applause quiet but genuine. The next week, Gabriel set up a community fund, a simple box at the back of the church where anyone in need could receive help. Slowly but surely, the town rallied behind him, the skepticism fading into something more. More donations came in, not just from the wealthy, but from everyone who believed in the power of kindness. Flora, now fully recovered, was a bright light in the church. Her innocence and joy brought a sense of renewal to the entire town, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always room for redemption, for compassion, for hope. As the days passed, Gabriel found himself in another storm. His decision to use the church's emergency funds for Flora's treatment had ignited more than just gossip. It had drawn the attention of the bishop. The town had always been small, but now, Gabriel's actions were under a microscope, and there were consequences to consider. The bishop, a man known for his conservative views and cautious nature, called Gabriel into his office. Gabriel walked into the dimly lit room, his heart heavy. He had known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier. He had always prided himself on being a man of faith, but now he felt the pressure of his role as a priest weighing down on him. "Father Gabriel," the bishop began, his voice stern but not unkind, "I've heard a great deal about your actions. I must admit, I am conflicted. The church's funds are meant to serve the spiritual needs of our community. To use them for medical treatment, however noble, is unorthodox." Gabriel nodded, taking a deep breath. He had prepared himself for this. "I understand, Your Excellency. I did what I thought was right. But I also believe that our duty is to care for our community, body and soul. The child was in need, and I couldn't turn her away." The bishop studied him carefully, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. Gabriel could feel the weight of the bishop's gaze, but he didn't flinch. He had done what he believed was right, and he wasn't going to apologize for it. After what felt like an eternity, the bishop finally spoke. "I've heard the stories from the people in town. I've seen the change in their attitudes. Some are upset, others are praising you for your actions. But I must say, Father Gabriel, there is something undeniable in the way the community has come together. You've sparked something that's brought people closer." Gabriel felt a flicker of hope. Could it be that the bishop was beginning to understand? "The unity you've fostered, it's rare," the bishop continued. "In times like these, when people are so divided, your decision has brought them together. The town, for all its whispers and doubts, is better for it." Perhaps it is a reminder of what the church is truly about: compassion, selflessness, and service. Gabriel could hardly believe his ears. Was the bishop actually supporting him? After a long pause, the bishop added, "I'm not going to remove you, Father Gabriel. But understand this: you must continue to lead with humility and be mindful of how you use the church's resources in the future. Your decision has consequences, both good and bad. But I've seen the good it has done." Relief washed over Gabriel. He had feared the worst, but in that moment, he realized that his actions had not only been a test of his faith, but also of his character. He had stood firm in what he believed, and in doing so, he had not only helped Flora and Jennifer, but also the entire community. "Thank you, Your Excellency," Gabriel said, his voice sincere. "I won't take this responsibility lightly." The bishop nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I know you won't, Father Gabriel. Just remember, sometimes the path of compassion is the hardest one to walk. But it is also the one that leads to true healing." Back in the church, Gabriel stood before the congregation, watching as people filed in for Sunday Mass. He saw familiar faces, some still uncertain, but many more with expressions of hope and solidarity. He knew that they had been changed by what had happened, that the act of saving one life had made them reconsider their priorities. It had reminded them of the importance of community, of helping one another, of showing kindness in a world that often seemed indifferent. Gabriel glanced over at Jennifer and Flora, who were sitting in the front row. Flora, fully recovered, was smiling as she held her mother's hand. Gabriel felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had helped save a life, but more than that, he had helped save a spirit. Jennifer's face, once weighed down with guilt and fear, was now filled with a quiet peace. As the Mass ended, the townspeople filed out of the church, their voices no longer filled with whispers or accusations, but with gratitude. And Gabriel, standing at the pulpit, realized that he had done more than save one life. He had reminded the world around him what it meant to truly live. Thanks for watching. How would you rate this story? Give it 1 to 5 hearts in the comments, and let me know what you thought. This is a brand new channel, and your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the story, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an episode. Your likes, comments, and shares help this community grow, and I'd be so grateful to have you along for the journey. See you next time.